Thin Wood Walls by David Patenaude. Chapter 1. I didn't like the back seat of our old Ford, and I avoided it whenever I could. Sitting short and low, I could only see where we were, but I wanted to be the first to see where we were going, and riding in back made me carsick in a hurry, especially on winding roads like the one we were on now. So I was happy to be up front with Dad and Mom, cheek against the cool glass, looking ahead. The window was rolled down an inch, allowing me to breathe in a small but steady stream of fresh December air. "Where are we going?" I said for the second, or maybe the third time. "You will see," Dad said. Mom smiled. From the back seat came my big brother Mike's voice, falsely squeaky, mocking me. "Where are we going?" "Hush, Michael," Mom said. Grandmother's voice rose behind me. "You have the patience of a puppy, Joseph." "How soon will we be there?" I said. Grandmother made a sound in her throat. Dad chuckled. He shook his head. "Soon, Joseph." I settled back. I could be patient. I watched as we turned from one quiet road to another, heading into the green hills east of our valley. I wondered what time it was. First there had been church and a long sermon from Reverend Sakamoto. Now this. How much longer would I have to wear this suit and tie? How much time would I have for my writing once we finally got home? The road wound into groves of evergreens and flattened out. We lost sight of farmland and houses. Dad slowed the car and leaned forward, peering down the right shoulder. I leaned also, eyes wide open, looking. For what? Finally, he braked and turned right, onto a two-rut dirt road, dark in the shadow of forest on either side, quiet like a graveyard. Were we lost? "Where are we?" Mike said. "The deepest jungle," Dad said, and I pictured fierce beasts, wolves and bears and mountain lions, lurking nearby, eyeing us, licking their slobbery lips. A month earlier, my teacher, Mrs. Linden, had asked me to write our class's Thanksgiving play. I leaped at the chance, staying inside, staying up late, writing a story about the first Thanksgiving. I didn't write about wild beasts in the woods, but if I were rewriting the play, I would add a scene. Brave pilgrims struggling through a gloomy forest thick with ferocious animals. We inched around a bend in the road, then another. It grew lighter. We came to a broad field of thick stumps, and growing among them, small trees. Dad stopped the car and turned off the engine. Before he could open his door, I was out, ready to see it, whatever it was. Mike jumped out next. Why didn't Grandmother ever needle him about impatience? The rest of the car emptied. Dad, then Mom, then Grandmother, stubbornly struggling to her feet on her own. Dad wore a small smile. Mom, too. Grandmother and Mike shared a puzzled look. I tried to look patient. I tried not to dance from foot to foot. "Put these on," Mom said. She took Mike's everyday shoes, then mine, from a bag. We sat on the Ford's running board and made a quick change. "Come," Dad said, taking Grandmother's arm. We stepped away from the car, our breath clouding the chilly air. Dad pulled a white handkerchief from his suit coat pocket. "This land belongs to the Spooners," he said. I looked around at the greens and browns stretching off in every direction. I heard the calls of birds. I smelled the wet, wintry smells of land that God had made. I closed my eyes and imagined. I liked to write haiku, a kind of Japanese poetry often linked to nature, and I wanted to remember this place. It was the kind of setting where haiku could take root. It would be good to own this property, I said. Grandmother made a sour face. "Tochi ho," she spat. Suddenly I was sorry I'd said anything. I didn't know much Japanese, but I knew that Tochi ho meant land law. Issei, immigrants from Japan, like my parents, like my grandmother, were forbidden by law to own land. "Mr. Spooner made me a kind offer," Dad said, ignoring his mother's words. "He said we should choose our Christmas tree from these young ones, no charge." A Christmas tree. We had never cut our own. I imagined finding the perfect one. I felt a little warmth fill my chest. My feet itched to move. "Where's the saw?" I asked Dad. I couldn't wait to cut our tree from the real woods and take it home. I couldn't wait to show it to my friend, Ray O'Brien. Dad smiled patiently. Today is not the cutting day, Joseph. Today is the choosing day. He held up the handkerchief. You and Michael may select a tree now and mark it with this for when we return. Mike took the handkerchief. Let's go find a prize winner, Joe. He marched off. I rushed to catch up. I should help them choose, Grandmother said behind me. She sounded serious, but Dad laughed. I sped up just in case, and Mike stayed in front of me, high-stepping. It would take us all day to find a tree if Grandmother helped us. There were hundreds of trees, but some were too tall for our living room. Others were too short, too skinny, too sparse, too lopsided. Finally, I found one that looked good. I proudly pointed it out to Mike. Hemlock, he said. It would lose half its needles the first day. We crossed the road, still searching. Maybe Mr. Spooner knew there were no Christmas trees here, Mike said. There are plenty, I said. We just haven't found the perfect one. I hurried off on my own, wondering how much time Dad would give us. I came to a huge stump, nearly my height, more than 10 feet across, and scrambled onto it. Standing, brushing wet debris from my suit, I noticed a promising clump of trees on the other side of a little knoll. I jumped down and headed toward them. And that's where I found it. Mike, I yelled, circling the tree. He was there in an instant. It's a fir, at least, he said, shadowing me as I went around and around, examining it up and down. The right height, he added, straight trunk, lots of branches, even growth, good color. We stopped circling. I waited for him to find something wrong with my tree. I held my breath. It's a beauty, Joe, he said finally, and I breathed deep. It's gonna make a swell Christmas tree. He knotted Dad's handkerchief snugly around the end of a high branch and patted me on the head. The sweet smell of bruised fir needles filled my nose. We waved to Mom, Dad, and Grandmother. We pointed at the tree and they clapped. Smiles lit their faces. Joe found a prize, Mike yelled, and I looked at my tree, uneasy about leaving it. Can we take it home today? I asked when we got back to the car. Someone else could find it. Not today, Joseph, Dad said. The tree will begin dying as soon as it loses its roots. We will come back, Mom said. It will still be here. If it is not, Grandmother said, there are others. Not like this one, Grandmother, Mike said. Joe found the champ. Still, Dad said, and began moving toward the car. The discussion was over. I looked once more, hoping I could see the tree, hoping I couldn't. From 50 yards away, the white handkerchief glowed against the green. Ray was sitting on our front porch steps when we got home. He had his battered basketball under his arm, dreams of playing for the University of Oregon in his head. I saw them reflected in his eyes as I got out of the car. How was St. Paul's, Joe? He unfolded his long frame and stood. We found a Christmas tree, Ray, I blurted out. At church? On Mr. Spooner's property. He's letting us cut one. It's a beauty, Mike said. Super, Ray said, eyeing the Ford's trunk. No one asked for my opinion, Grandmother said from inside the car. We don't have the tree yet, said to Ray. A tree starts dying as soon as it's cut. We're going back for it in 2 weeks. Maybe you can come. Of course he can, Mom said. Great, Ray said. Perhaps someone will ask for my opinion, Grandmother said, louder. She sat at the edge of the back seat, short legs dangling out. Dad said something to her in Japanese, and her frown disappeared. Grandmother will choose where to put the tree, he said. I decided that would be okay. Grandmother had an artist's eye. Shoot some baskets, Joe? Ray said. Mom invited you to lunch. Yeah, I said, before I thought to ask. Joseph was very fidgety in church, Raymond, Mom said, and my hopes cooled. For a moment I thought that this was going to be a perfect day. You must promise to tire him out. I felt myself smile. Dad, usually quick to ask Ray about his family, just nodded and went into the house. I promise, Mrs. Hanada, Ray said. Soon as I change, I said. You too, Mike, Ray said. Mike was trying to help Grandmother out of the car. You go shoot the baskets, Michael, she said, standing straight. I am not a cripple. We can make Joe chase rebounds, Ray told him. Funny, I said. Good idea, Mom said. Not now, Ray, Mike said. Like Dad, he seemed preoccupied. He was 16, but considered himself an adult. He'd been taking part in the late-night discussions with my parents and grandmother and their friends, and had gotten good at solemn faces, whispers, keeping me out of things. I wasn't 16. I was 11, and according to grandmother, cursed with impatience. But I wasn't impatient to grow up, to have to wear a long face. This was December. Kids my age were supposed to think only of what that meant. Christmas and presents, vacation from school, snow, although snow seldom came to the White River Valley. If I was impatient, it was for those things. But I was drawn to the whispers as a moth is drawn to a candle flame, seeking the light, suffering the heat. The more I learned, the hotter the world seemed, the darker. 2 days earlier, Friday evening, I had paused outside the kitchen long enough to hear Mom, Dad, Mike, and Grandmother talking about a subject that these days seemed to hang in the air like ground fog, smelling of unseen things rotting. Germany, Dad was saying. Germany we know about. And it's all bad, Mike said. Still, Dad said. Germany is the single-edged sword, Mom said. We know where it will cut. It's cutting the world in half, Mike said. And it must be stopped, Dad said. But a bigger concern for us is the unknown. When will the United States enter the war? And once that happens, what will Germany ally in the Pacific? Japan do? Japan is the double-edged sword, Mom said. War with Japan will hurt not just the United States, but us as a people. Once our country and Japan are enemies, what will we be? What will our neighbors think of us? What will the government do about us? Government, Grandmother echoed. She had no love for government, ours or Japan's. Her husband, an innocent bystander, had been killed by government policemen during a political disturbance at a Tokyo park in 1905. Grandmother had been a widow ever since. Dad had been a half-orphan. Will we be treated as Americans, Dad said, or as Japanese? We are Americans, Mike said. Joe and I are citizens. Citizens, Grandmother said. Yes, but she didn't sound convinced, or convincing. Issei were not only forbidden to own land, they also couldn't become citizens here. I slipped away, burning with worry. I had come too close to the flame. By Sunday, though, war talk had been pushed to the corners of my mind again. War was something I would rather not think about. 20 minutes after I got home from church and the Christmas tree adventure, Ray and I had run the half-mile to his house and were out on our deluxe basketball court. Months before, Ray's dad had mounted a rim and backboard on the sturdy trunk of a cottonwood, and Ray and I did the rest, ground clearing, weed pulling, rock mining, driving the tractor back and forth to pack the dirt. I wasn't tall, and Ray was. He could shoot and dribble with both hands and grab rebounds. But I could shoot too, and I was quicker. Most days I kept our games close. I challenged him to game of one-on-one. We flipped a penny for our first outs. Ray won the toss, but I wouldn't let one little thing ruin a perfect day. He took the ball and backed me toward the hoop, dribbling side to side, his usual tactic. Come on, big man, I said. Go straight at me, face to face. And let you steal it? But suddenly he pivoted and drove, me on his hip. He started up for a shot, but ended up without the ball. I'd wiped it away. You got it down in dangerous territory, I said, dribbling back out. Joe territory. Yeah, he said. Yeah. He charged at me out of control, and I went around him for an easy layup. I'll give you that one, he said, but you need 9 more. At least your arithmetic's good, I said. Yeah, and my arithmetic says I'm 8 inches taller than you. He started backing me down again, protecting the ball. There wasn't much I could do. And 8 hours slower, I said. He backed me all the way under the basket and banked in an easy shot. Tied, Speedy, he said. We kept playing, sweating and laughing, trading baskets. With the game tied at 9 each, Ray missed a shot. I beat him to the rebound and dribbled out with him on me close, long arms waving in my face. I faked a drive and went up for a shot. The ball left my hand, and his hand came down hard across my arm. The shot went in, then out, and Ray grabbed the rebound. I fouled you, he said, handing me the ball. After the shot, I said, adjusting my glasses on my nose. It didn't matter. Your ball, he said, take it out. No, I said, I missed the shot. You rebounded. I tried to hand the ball back to him, but he wouldn't take it. I let it drop to the ground. Ray stared at the ball, then up at the bare limbs of the cottonwood, as if something were there. 9-9, he said. Let's call it a game. He took a deep breath, slow through his nose. I think I smell lunch. Ray's nose was right. Good smells. Roast beef and fresh-baked bread lured us to the house. We'd just gotten to the back door when his mom appeared, looking like she'd been slapped. She tugged at the neck of her sweater as if she didn't know what to do with her hands. Ray's dad stood behind her, wearing the same wounded expression. I heard radio sounds, a newsman's voice. "You boys come and eat," Mrs. O'Brien said. "Then we're going to walk Joe home." "There's been some bad news," Mr. O'Brien said. I searched their faces for clues. Had something happened to my parents? Mike? Grandmother? "What?" Ray's round, freckled face took on the gray color of the sky. Ray's parents looked at each other, frozen, their big bodies filling the doorway. Finally, Mrs. O'Brien spoke up. "We thought we should wait for your folks to tell you, Joe, but I don't want you to worry over the wrong things." She leaned down, hands on my shoulders, and looked me gently in the eye, and kept looking too long. "What happened?" I said. "What's wrong?" "Your family's fine," she said. She swallowed, and a tear squeezed from the corner of her eye and eased down her cheek. "But we just heard on the radio that the Japanese, have bombed us, bombed our military bases in Hawaii." "They sank our ships," Mr. O'Brien said. "Big ones, lots of them. Killed hundreds, maybe thousands, of our sailors." I couldn't believe it. "Maybe it's not true," I said. "Maybe it's make-believe, like that radio show about the men from Mars." I strained to hear what the man on the radio was saying, but Mr. O'Brien walked into the house and switched it off. "Yeah," Ray said. "Why would Japan bomb us? We're not in the war." His voice was shaking. Tears were building up on his bottom eyelids. His mom put her arm around his shoulders. "We don't know, but it's not make-believe. We checked other radio stations. Your dad called his friend at the Seattle Times. I'd lost my appetite. I just wanted to be with my family. I wondered if they knew, if I should call them. But we went in and washed up and sat down. Ray, his mom and dad, his little brother, Henry, and me. Everyone took some food. Henry, who was safe in his 5-year-old world, began eating. But I couldn't stay. I pushed out my chair and stood. "I have to go," I said. "Sorry." I headed for the door, grabbing my coat on the way out, but the O'Briens were right behind me. "It's okay, Joe," Mrs. O'Brien said, her voice fading. I was hurrying, but Ray caught up with me, and Henry managed to take the lead, half running, half skipping. We were close to my house when I saw 3 familiar figures approaching. I took off running. I zoomed past Henry and waded into Mom's arms, then Dad's. Mike stood there, hands jammed in his pockets, anger on his face. The muscles in his thick neck bulged out like bamboo stalks. He put a hand on my shoulder as I looked around. Up and down our street, people, Japanese, American, and white, were out in front of their houses, clustered in small groups, separate groups. The O'Briens caught up to us. "You've heard, Tomio?" Mr. O'Brien asked Dad. He nodded, but the answer was already set deep into his face. "I have heard. It's war for sure," Mr. O'Brien said. Mrs. O'Brien looked at Mom. "Oh, Michi," she sighed. "God bless us." She wrapped up Mom in a mother bear of a hug. Mom held on, as if caught in a tornado. "Shame rains down on us," she murmured, and I remembered what she'd said about the double-edged sword. Those words had seemed far away now. They seemed too close. I felt chilled and hot at the same time. "It isn't your shame, dear," Mrs. O'Brien said. Mr. O'Brien offered his hand to Dad, and Dad took it in both of his. The O'Briens meant to comfort us, but then Mom and Mrs. O'Brien let go. Dad and Mr. O'Brien dropped their hands to their sides. Ray forced a sad smile. It felt as if something had died. We left the O'Briens and trudged, voiceless, to our house, eyes ahead. But I sensed someone watching me. I looked into the nearest yard, where Mr. and Mrs. Richardson and their twin daughters, my age, stood and stared. Their arms were folded across their chests. Their faces were ugly with hostility. Their eyes flashed in our direction. I felt the shame my mother had spoken of. I felt anger at myself for feeling it. I had done nothing, but my dream day had suddenly turned into a nightmare. And what of the next day? What of my life? I joined my family in our living room and heard the end of a news report. Sneak attack. Talks with the Japanese ambassador had given no hint. Thousands of innocent sailors feared dead. Declaration of war on Japan expected soon. Jap Navy, Jap planes, Jap treachery, Jap this, Jap that. Grandmother sat close to me on the davenport and listened. She spoke English with a thick accent, but she knew the language well. Dad had taught her, and she learned more from reading, her favorite pastime, and talking, her second favorite. She squeezed my hand. Dad clicked off the radio. The room went silent. It was the silence that always hung in the air while they waited for me to leave. While they waited to begin their adult discussion, while they put on their long faces, I unraveled my fingers from grandmother's and went to the entryway, where my coat hung on the tree. I slipped it on slowly. I pawed through the cabinet for my hat and gloves, pushing them aside, pretending to search while the murmuring began in the living room. I tugged on my gloves, checking my reflection as I passed the mirror. My face looked worried. It looked long. "We're not the enemy," I heard Mike say. "Why do our neighbors glare at us?" "Scapegoats," Dad said. "They are looking for someone to blame. We are the closest thing, in proximity, in looks." "Not all of them are like that," Mom said. Grandmother shook her head and uncorked a spout of Japanese, then English. The other voices joined hers in a jumble of words. I could feel the heat behind them. They noticed me standing there. The talk stopped. I started for the door, and like magic, it began again. Just a hum, but I did pick out 2 words: Pearl Harbor. The words meant nothing to me, but when I plucked them from the hushed conversation, like a prospector mines gold pebbles from a pan of swirling muck, my mind filled with wonder. I thought of the Swiss Family Robinson and Treasure Island and magazines with pictures of beautiful faraway places. I imagined sunshine and crystal blue water and brown girls diving from sturdy boats. I saw those girls descending through the water, down and down, to pluck oysters from the seabed, then rising like billowing jellyfish, lungs aching. I saw them prying open the rough and homely shells, finding a silky layer of rainbow-hued mother-of-pearl inside, and then, best of all, spilling from the opened shells to their cupped hands, pearls the size of marbles, glowing with light and color.